Steve Rodgers, thank you so much for being on the Mindful Impact podcast today.
My pleasure.
I want to ask you so the listeners get an idea of a day in the life of kind of. I used to ask the question when you wake up in the morning, what makes your heart sing out loud? But I've been getting some feedback and you get a more picture of what it's like in your life, Steve. What does a typical like weekday look like for you usually?
Well,
The
I
short
guess we
version.
have, yeah, I guess we have pre-COVID and then post-COVID, right?
Let's do. We might as well do COVID since we're in it and we don't look like
Yeah.
we're getting out of it for a while.
Well, luckily I don't have far to commute to my office. I just have to walk through my backyard. My golden retriever follows me to work. I come outside in my outside office. And luckily I live in San Diego, California, in Encinitas. So before I go to work, I usually have a morning process I go through with prayer and meditation and reading and some type of exercise, yoga or biking or running or some fashion. Then I make my green smoothie and I'm on with my day. So I'm usually in this seat for most of the day now on Zoom calls or webinars or virtual speaking events or doing creative work, or I've got 4 virtual assistants around the world. So I work with them on different time zones of projects and things we're working on. And then I wrap up in the evening, and then my coach tells me I have to earn my meal. So I always have to do some other form of physical activity or something before I get to eat at night. And then I eat, and then I usually unwind a little bit. Sometimes I watch a little Netflix or read or do whatever, and then a little meditation, and then retire for the night.
That's great. There's actually a bunch in there that I want to ask you about. First, what are you reading right now? Curious.
Oh my gosh, I've got so many books on my nightstand. I'm reading Emmet Fox, Sermon on the Mountain, which is he's a spiritual he's a spiritual writer, somewhat Christian based, but he really takes a lot of biblical stuff and turns it into very mainstream ways to understand excerpts of religious teachings. I'm reading Paramahansa Yogananda, some stuff by him right now. I'm reading Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm reading some stuff by Marshall Goldsmith. I'm reading some stuff by Robert Glazer. I've got, what else do I have on my nightstand?
So you have several books going at once, huh?
Yeah, I always have different things. I'm reading Vishen Lakhani's book, Buddha and the Badass.
The new book, his new book, yeah.
Yeah, that's just excellent. So yeah, I've always got stacks of books, either on my desk tables, bed stands, or in my iPad or on my phone. I'm always flipping through stuff. I'm not usually a read a book from beginning to end. I'm a read excerpts, pick it up, absorb it, and then jump into something else.
This is so random, but this is just because over the past 2 years, I've been like an extremely avid book reader. And I get this sensation. So I want to ask you, I get this sensation of like when I'm 3/4 of the way through a book, and I usually have 2 or 3, sometimes 4 going at once. I like have to finish it. You don't get that?
No.
And I'm trying to let that go because, it'd be nice because sometimes I'm like, I don't even want to finish this book. And,
yeah, no, I don't know why I don't have that. I mean, I like to finish things for sure, but I guess it's kind of like, I like to savor it. Like, I know that it's like, if I'm at a certain point, I know my mind or my soul or my body is only willing or able to absorb it to that point. And if I'm feeling like I just am not absorbing it in the way I want to, or I'm not motivated to finish it, I'll put it down and I eventually will come back and wrap it up. Now, clearly there's books that are sitting around that I haven't finished for sure. But I'm kind of that ADD random absorb information as I need it kind of guy.
Yeah, I like that. There are a few, like the 12 Steps to Life. I think it's Jason Campbell or something's book. Really good book you might have heard of that I always just go back to because I just can't finish it in a straight session,
Right. For sure.
But you have yourself, you've written a couple books and you have the most recent one where you talk about, if you want to share the title with us.
Yeah, it's called the Iggy Principles. It looks like IGI, so some people might pronounce it Iggy, or they might just say IGI, but it's called the Iggy Principles, and it's the opposite of the word ego. So one of the other writers that has been around for many years and unfortunately has passed is Wayne Dyer. But Wayne Dyer is a great spiritual business activist and psychologist and therapist, and he has written many, many books, but he used to talk a lot about the ego. And when I was in corporate America and climbing corporate ladders and various things, I definitely was in ego. So he always said that ego represented edging God out. or edging good out. And I thought, oh, that's a really easy way to remember that. When I'm in my ego, I'm not always in the best self. So like 15 years ago, I said, well, I need to remind myself what is the opposite of ego when I'm trying not to be an ego. So I said, well, that would be inviting good in or inviting God in. So I've had this little mantra for 15 years about, am I an ego or am I an Iggy? Ego or Iggy? So it's just been my own personal mantra. And over the years, it's turned into principles and steps that I use with clients or teachings. And now I've written a book about it.
Yeah, that's so powerful, Steve. Can you give us an example of when recently that you let ego take over, but you became aware of it and then changed it to Iggy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say within my relationship with my wife, it's continually.
Yeah,
I've been married.
I'm with you.
I know. I saw you. I heard you've been married 8 years. I think you said you have 2 kids, and
Yes.
Prior to that, you were quite the playboy, from what I understand. So,
well, who's doing the research?
But you know, when you're in conversations with someone like that you've known for 35 years and you're married to a significant other spouse, we sometimes feel like we can read their mind, we can finish their sentences, we can anticipate what they're going to say. And we sometimes, as men or human beings, I'm not sure which it is, sometimes feel a need to defend or to sell or pitch on something or a topic or subject or to get your way. So I find when I am using my selling techniques with my wife, it never works very well. And I realize that I'm in my ego of trying to be right or trying to get something I want or trying to get her to do something in, you know, whatever, and that my ego is in control of it. So I'm like, okay, is this about your ego? Or are you really inviting, like, do you really want to hear her? Do you really want to connect with her? Do you really want to honor her? Do you really want to value her? Do you really want to make her feel cherished and appreciated? And if sometimes the answer is in my head, yes, but my actions are not reflecting that. So I do that a lot with my wife, Iggy or ego. Also with like clients, sometimes I'll be with clients or something will happen, or I'm in the middle of a huge project right now. On the other side of the project I'm representing for a client, one of the people I'm involved with him is just a guy that really pushes a lot of people's buttons. And I'll find myself with a text or an email trying to correct or to show him how incorrect or wrong he is. And I realize in that text or message, I'm like, do not hit send, pause for an hour or two, look and see if that's really coming from ego or Iggy, and do you really need to send it that way or not? Sometimes I'll just hit the delete button, delete, and let it sit and pause and reframe it a different way. So those are some examples, I guess.
And how do you how do you do that? You take like a deep breath, kind of like stop before you send? Do you just, you know, like sometimes, you know, you're having a conversation, somebody just keeps send. I mean, do you recommend taking like 15 seconds before you respond to somebody, taking a few minutes? Do you have a thing that you do, or just kind of?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I guess the 50,000 foot answer about that question is it has become an operating system.
I love that.
You know,
okay.
we all know on our phones, you know, you and are you an Apple or you an Android or you whatever, and we know on our phones, our tablets, our computers, we have operating systems. And those operating systems run all day on whatever they're programmed to do, whatever operating system you have. So luckily, I have programmed myself that my thinking and my thoughts are always having this running in my mind. And sometimes I'm more aware of it than others. So when I feel my breath starting to heat up, if I feel my heart starting to rapidly go, if I feel my mind starting to go really quickly, I know it's time for me to take a quick pause and do a minute or two just breathing meditation and just check in and regroup. If I'm doing something that's really intense and I feel like, oh yeah, and I'm just so intently about something, writing an email, having a conversation, then I know it's time for me to reflect and say, is that energy being projected in the right way? The other way that I do it is before I ever walk into a meeting, pick up a phone call, send an email, start a session, I do a little bit of centering and I just say, okay, am I going to walk into this from a presence of ego or Iggy? And before I start something, I frame my thinking about preparing for that mindset. So it really is just this, you know, this habit of self-course correction. It's like a plane that leaves San Diego and it's on its way to New York. It's constantly autopilot, course correcting. So I'm just constantly course correcting myself all day because my brain can just do crazy things and it runs on fast speed. And I have to constantly work on realizing I'm in control of my mind. And my mind is also being controlled, and I can control my emotion by my higher being controlling my mind and controlling my emotion.
Makes sense. So listen, you weren't okay based on the books you're reading, and what you're talking about now. Your whole life wasn't always like this, right? I was reading your story on your website briefly. Can we go back to, because it, from the outside perspective, Steve, it looked like you had the American dream. You had it all. Like life was great for you. You were the CEO of a Berkshire Hathaway division company. You had, I know you had a daughter. Did you have any other children?
I have a daughter and a son, and
Nice.
now grandkids from the daughter and the son.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
thank you.
And then you know, you were married and you had a big house, a yacht, I'm pretty sure. And, you know, from the outside, it looked like you had it all. What was life like during then? And what was kind of the transition point that brought you to this, I don't know, you want to call it a transformation or the new journey that you're on now?
Yeah, there was probably a couple what I call brick upside the head moments. I mean, sometimes we're running and we think, oh, we're doing what we're supposed to be doing as human beings, as businessmen or women, as leaders, as, getting the American dream. And I definitely was on that path. I'm a guy that barely graduated high school. I moved out of my house when I was 17, but I always had a drive. I always had like a drive to do more, be more, get more. So when I got into the real estate business and eventually into corporate America and executive world, I did, put on that suit and tie, got the briefcase in hand and went out to conquer the world. And on that path, my ego served me very well for many years. The ego definitely gets shit done. There's no question that your ego can get shit done.
Yeah.
The problem in hindsight is that I was more out of balance in my life than I realized at the time, but I so diminished it, meaning I so downplayed it because I did have a big house. I did have a big title. I did have more money than I thought I would ever have. And I did have a healthy marriage that I thought, and I did have kids and, all of that stuff. So, and I also was comparing myself to others. So I would look around and go, well, I'm not as bad as so-and-so, or I'm not as bad as so-and-so in my deficiencies. So even though I was like, because in my world, I was in the real estate space and it's all about selling houses, awards, whatever it might be. So it is a competition. It's an industry full of competition. So when you're constantly helping praise others, and then when I became an executive, I was helping drive and motivate salespeople. So it was all about drive and competition and all of that stuff. But behind the scenes, I was reaping the benefit of my success by being a glutton in stuff I shouldn't have been a glutton in, drinking too much, doing things excessively. And for a while, it was fun and it worked. And I thought that was part of the American dream. But what I realized is my drinking alcohol, which I realized I was very good at. I was always an overachiever, and I became an overachiever.
I would like to, at the time, I would have challenged you on that. I would have taken you one-on-one on that one.
It would have been a good competition for sure. I was well, the thing about me is that I was in the restaurant business before I was in real estate. So in my teens and late teens and early 20s, I was a waiter, I was a bartender, I worked in a restaurant. So I knew every wine, every cognac, every bourbon. And I was like, I was number one, I sold food and alcohol for a living. And then after work, I enjoyed everything that could possibly exist of it. So
well,
I
Steve,
was
I'm reading the Anthony Bourdain's book right now. I'm in the middle of it. So I know exactly what that life is like now. I didn't know. Now so I'm picturing exactly what you're saying right now.
Yeah. I mean, that was like you'd work all night and then you'd get off at shift at like 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then you'd party all night till like 4 or 5 in the morning, and you'd sleep till, 2 or 3 till you had to be back at work. So in that late teen, early 20 days, it was like, oh yeah, this is the life. But so I got really good at a habit of it. Then when I got in corporate America, I had to put a suit and tie on, in the morning, and then I had to look presentable, and I had to kind of curb that. But my appetite for gluttony didn't shift and change. It just became more acceptable to then have an expense account to go out and entertain people and make that part of my job. So that ego that I was talking about, part of my job was, being the big guy on campus, buying dinner, buying people drinks. I did have a boat, taking them out on my boat. But that was part of the job. So if part of the job was gluttony and I was getting compensated and paid for it, it really started taking control of me. And just like I was saying, how ego or Iggy can take control of your thoughts or your mind, and your mind can take control of your emotion. My addiction to drive success and my addiction to alcohol and other things along the way, really started chipping away at my soul. It really just started chipping away at who I
Mm.
was, even though the outside continued to look like there was success happening.
Could you have done that job from more of an Iggy perspective? Um, could you have done it like who you are now and what you're aware of now?
The answer is yes, but I'm not sure that I would have wanted to. Meaning,
Yeah.
at that time when I was driving the ladder, the reason that I went through so many things is I was always trying to prove something. Since I'm a guy that barely graduated high school and I got to a few years of college, but never graduated college, um, I always had this insecurity that I wasn't enough and that someone was going to find out that I didn't have a degree or that I was, from a Midwest kind of blue collar family, and that wasn't going to play, especially in the world of Southern California. I live in San Diego. And so when I moved out here, everything's or LA to San Diego. It's glamour. It's, great looking people. It's fancy cars and beach houses and, all that stuff. And I was very enamored by that lifestyle. And I love living in Southern California.
Which makes
However,
sense.
yeah, I mean, it was a great life, but that drive back then, had I been in Ego or Iggy and I would have continually compared Iggy, I think I would have changed my value system of how important that really was for me to climb that ladder in the way in which I climbed it. So I mean, that's a very good question. I think I could still have done it. I just think I would have taken a different path sooner about even being more of a purpose-driven leader and more of a conscious, spiritual business activist like I am now. But I guess I had to earn my stripes first to be able to have that cred to
Right.
be able to do that. So everything serves its purpose. I don't ever believe anything doesn't happen except for a reason at the time. But in reflection, you go, would I have done it that way? I'm not sure I would have done it that way.
Yeah,
But
it was more of like it was more of a curious question of than
right.
anything, because obviously everything, yeah, you would never be here without, certain events happening to you. What you said, I think a lot of people can relate to trying to prove something, right? What you said earlier, trying to prove yourself to somebody or prove something to somebody else. Was there anybody specific, or was it more just in general, just trying to, prove your quote unquote worth or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I think part of it was for my dad. My dad, luckily, is still alive and he's in his mid 80s. But my dad was a very tough military guy and he was very stern and very disciplined. And we had 5 boys in our house. So my parents had 5 boys in 6 years. So you can imagine that all that male testosterone in the house growing
Your
up.
poor mom.
Oh, God. We even had a male dog. My mom had, a husband, 5 boys, and a male dog. It was like, I don't know how the hell she did it. But I mean, it was always like, fighting and competition and, the brothers competing in each other. And then my dad was a very, very, very strong disciplinarian. And so that was part of the reason that I moved out of my house when I was 17. And I remember some of his words when I was, flying out of the driveway after he and I had a knockout, drive out fight, which I was like, oh shit, I just hit my dad. I'm dead. That's like never gonna, it's like, how did that happen? I can't believe I just did that. It was just a very intense situation as a 17-year-old young man, going fist to cuff with his dad, and breaking down the barrier of who was in control. And it was a very intense situation. And I regret taking that action on my dad, but it definitely had me go out and, finish the last year of high school on my own, finish going from part-time job to a full-time job. And then proving to them that I could graduate. My dad, I remember, I don't know if he says he does remember saying this, but I remember flying out of the driveway in my old beat up 71 Toyota Corolla, and him yelling, you'll never be anything but a garbage man, kind of phrasing, because I was going to leave the house and break the norm. And so when I graduated high school and I hadn't seen them in my parents in 6 or 8 months, maybe 10 months at that point, and I saw them in the audience, I was like shocked and just like, wow. And it was, they saw me walk down and get my graduation cap and all of that, my diploma. But that was a sense of proving to them that I could do it and I could do it on my own. So I think that my dad, part of the drive, proving to him I could do it. And luckily my dad and I now have a very, very good relationship over the years. But then it did become proving it to the world. It became proving it to, in hindsight, it was proving it to myself that I was worthy enough, that I was worthy enough along the path. But at the time it was my dad and then the world in general.
Yeah, it's almost like you can look at that and think, and I'm obviously not a psychologist, but as you tell the story, it's like your dad probably that he might have tried every last ditch effort to get you to, try harder at school maybe, or something like that. And then his last calling out to you was like, all right, fine, then you're just not going to amount to anything. And then that was like your chip on the shoulder that you needed from him to prove to like actually like do it. Right. And it's
Yeah.
really, really interesting when you look at it from a perspective like that. Right.
It is. It's always fascinating what pushes the human
Yeah.
psyche or the human condition. And
Yeah.
then you also wonder about destiny. I mean, how much of that stuff is predestined in our own soul's path and our own,
Right.
purpose-driven lives that we come here as these soul beings, having this human experience that we all experience on the planet.
Yeah. Part of the essential elements of the Iggy formula that you have um, is forgiveness, gratitude, morality, service, and trust. And I'll say that again, right? Because this is right from your website. Forgiveness, gratitude, morality, service, and trust.
And then prayer and meditation as well. I'm not sure if that's listed there.
Prayer, meditation. I might have not copied that entire thing. One of the things, the thing that sticks out to me the most in this, and this is from my personal experience from talking with people, is the trust factor. Right. And what I mean by that is I think that's the hardest piece to tackle. So for someone like yourself, you had a very financially rewarding job as a CEO, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
how did you trust yourself to let go of that and get into what you're doing now? How did you do that part, or was it a thing, a process that led up to the trust?
Uh, it was a process that led up to the trust, yes. And over, when I did my first transition from the restaurant business in my late 20s to becoming a salesperson, and I got a real estate license, and then I sold my first house, and then I became rookie of the year, and then I became a manager. Each time that I'm like, wow, I can do this, it became a notch in the belt of more confidence and more I can fit in the world, even though I don't have a college degree. And so far, no one has found me out. And I'm still making more money. So there was this, hopefully no one will ever find out. It was always kind of looking over your shoulder. And I never realized how intense that was until years later, when I remember I was on the plane flying to go meet Warren Buffett. And our company had been purchased. And I, at the time, was either the general manager or the vice president. And the gentleman who owned our company, our real estate company in Southern California, had sold his real estate company to Warren Buffett for over $100 million. And I was one of his key executives. And I was on the plane invited to go back with a group of our leaders, about 20 of us, to go back and meet with Warren Buffett for a private meeting and a dinner. And I was on the plane and I was like so excited, like, oh my God, I'm going to meet Warren Buffett. This is great. And I had like a little mini panic attack, like, oh shit, like who am I to go meet Warren Buffett? Like I started having these self-doubt voices pop up and, oh shit. And it was that moment where it was like, this is going to be the time. This is where they're going to find out I don't have a degree or I am some kind of an imposter. Because I always had this fear, like I was going to end up in some conference room or some boardroom and all these other men and women that had master's degrees or PhDs or whatever it was going to be had some secret key and answer to life that I just didn't have because I didn't get the whatever. And that never happened. But I kept thinking that all these people that had all this academic degree, which I highly respect, but I was weird. I had this panic attack. I couldn't figure out why. And I thought, wow, that's really, my insecurities are still there. And I had to talk myself off the ledge on the plane, so to speak, in my mind to say, wow, you actually wouldn't be on this plane flying back to meet Warren Buffett and being selected from hundreds of people in your company had you not earned the right that they felt you were worthy to go. And so I had to get into that I am worthy. And when I walked in the room and saw him, there's about 20 or 25 people at a cocktail party. And it was just a very surreal, cool experience. And I ended up, having a conversation with him directly. I had dinner with him different times in different meetings. He was at different events we went to. And it's not like I reported to Warren Buffett, and it's not like he knew me by first name and, hey, Steve, let's go have a cup of coffee. Nothing like that. But I definitely worked under his company for many, many years. And I got the pleasure of being in that environment. And I realized I did get to the top of the food chain in a very untraditional way that most people do not in that world that I was in. But the trust factor built slowly every single time that happened. However, when your question was about how did I break away and have the trust to do it, it wasn't because I had the trust at the time to break away in 2008.
Yeah.
The real estate market had crashed in 2008. And for anybody that was around in 2008, It was the mortgage meltdown. Banks were
Mm-hmm.
closing. The government was bailing out people left and right. The real estate market was crashing. And our company went from being the star company. At that time, I wasn't then by that time the CEO of the company, and had been for a few years. And we were like king of the hill. We were always like breaking records in California. And we were like half of all the profit for the Berkshire Hathaway real estate division just in our one company. We were doing 25 billion a year in sales of homes, and we were selling around 36,000 houses a year. We had 5,000 salespeople for all this, and I was the CEO of that whole operation. But then in 2008, the world crashed, and I had to start firing and laying people off and closing office and cutting and consolidating. And so over about a year and a half, I closed half the company down. We went from 110 real estate offices to about 55 real estate offices. And then a week before Christmas, 2008, I got fired and I got pushed out. And I was the guy in the street after being 15 years at that company and going from being a manager to becoming a CEO. They put the guy in under me that made less money and was not, and was more maneuverable than I was, because I was pushing back a lot at the time because I thought they were making a lot of mistakes. But that forced me to be fired to go create a new path and a new life. So that wasn't by trust and respect. That was out of necessity and fear that I went out, and then I created my own real estate company, and I ran that for 5 years. And in the worst real estate market in history that I ever worked in, I built 10 real estate offices in San Diego over about a year or two period, and ran that for 5 years.
And
but after that, I did sell that, chunks of that off. And then I made a decision to break away from that because a lot of different reasons. But that's when I became then a purpose-driven consultant, coach, author, speaker, spiritual business activist process. And that was by choice. So the 5 years ago when I started Alchemy Advisors was when that trust really was, I'm choosing to do this because what I'm doing, I'm no longer passionate about. Even though I'm running the 5th largest real estate company in San Diego, I've got, it was no longer serving me, and I knew I was being called to do something else. And that's where trust really kicked in.
Let me ask you this. During that time, because I have a lot of families that listen to this podcast, during that time, how did you see yourself as a father during building your real estate company?
As a father, let's see, back when I was doing that, I was a good father at that time. Back when I was climbing the corporate ladder as the CEO, right before that, I thought I was a great father because we had a big house, went on fancy vacations, took the kids to Europe, yada, yada, yada. But now, many, many, many years later, I realized from my daughter's perspective, I was not a good father at all. I was selfish. I was self-absorbed. I was an alcoholic. I was a functioning alcoholic, but I figured since I was the one providing, but I've now had many conversations with my daughter, who's now in her 30s, and she has, she has a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. So they're probably about the age of your kids.
It's like she's like mirroring my life right now.
Yeah, you could be my son. Yeah, you're that's how much older I am than you. But we've had deep conversations in later years that she told me how much I traumatized her when I was in that midst. And there's a story that I tell, when you're an alcoholic and you're a functioning alcoholic and you're in denial about how dysfunctional your life is because you're still productive and you're being successful, you don't realize in that moment the damage and the wake that you leave behind you with the decisions you make. And I didn't realize that till years later. But she told me when she used to get in the car when she was 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, and I would drive and pick her up, and she knew I'd been drinking or come from an event, or she could smell alcohol on me, or we'd gone out to dinner and she'd see me have 4 or 5 cocktails. And she knew that didn't seem right. She said she was always terrified, that she was in the back of the car and she was always terrified I was going to get in a wreck. I was going to get arrested. Something was going to happen to her. And then when I would pick up her friends and drive them around to school or events, she was embarrassed. She was fearful that they were going to suspect that. So there was many times that other stories that happened that I traumatized her and my son, thinking I was providing them a good life. And I created a lot of fear and anxiety in their life that I didn't realize. So at that time, it was not healthy.
What do you say?
And she was one of the reasons I quit drinking. Her actions.
Was there actually? I think I read something specific, like really changed it. There was a note or.
Yeah, I came home from an event one night and I had made either private promises to her and or my wife, because usually the people, when you're at least for me, as a functioning alcoholic, it's usually only your immediate circle of your closest people that know you really have that big of a problem. Because when you're a functioning alcoholic, you go out and you put on the suit and tie and you're speaking in front of events and whatever. You're not going home and having them going, oh God, you had too many drinks again tonight, didn't you? Or why are you drinking at home again tonight when you just got home from work after being at an event all night? I would go home after events and drink and, sit in front of the TV and have more cocktails. So my wife started having ultimatums about, you either need to quit drinking or I'm going to leave you, kind of conversation. And then my daughter and son, hearing that, as my daughter was like 14 or 15 maybe at the time. No, she was 15. She also said, when are you going to stop this? And I remember now her just like giving me some meaning, I don't want you to do this anymore. You scare me.
Okay.
And I came home one night, and this is back in the day of yellow pages. Remember when you're probably too young for that, but they had yellow pages before the internet.
I remember.
So it's that book with all the phone numbers. But I come home from work one night, and I'd been at an event longer than I should have. I was supposed to pick her up from some dance or thing that she was at, and I missed it. Someone else had to pick her up. And I got home and the house was really quiet. My wife was gone. And in the middle of the center island of the kitchen, there was a huge laundry basket, one of those big wicker baskets like you put your laundry in. And I looked and I was, what is in that? Why is that in the middle of our kitchen? Did our housekeeper leave that in the middle of the kitchen? What the heck? And I look and I turn the light on in the kitchen, and every single alcohol bottle that I had in our home was emptied and turned upside down in this wicker basket, like 50 bottles upside down, emptied. And there was a yellow pages opened, and there was a note with an arrow to it, and it was circled with AA, and it just said, you need help. And it was my daughter's handwriting.
Oh, the feeling in that moment.
Yeah, I was humiliated. I was fearful for her. I was shocked. I was a realization of massive fear. I was panicked. It was the flood of emotions was just overwhelming. I felt humiliated, embarrassed. I felt fearful for her. I felt ashamed. I felt all kinds of stuff. It was just like, wow. It was like, oh my God. Here I thought I was putting on this great facade. Like, I'd been out at work again. I'd, entertained all these people. I'm still driving back up to the same driveway in the big house with the same, emblem on my car that was the Mercedes or whatever it was I was driving. And I walk into the insides of my deepest, relationships in my house, and they're like, you need help.
What's really, and that was the trend. That was the transition point for you, right?
Yeah.
Steve,
I was just almost about 40 then.
Yeah.
So, and then that was one of the massive triggers that within weeks of that, I ended up getting help, and I haven't had a drink in 18 years.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I have addiction runs in my family, so I've know it somewhat, but I won't sit in this spot too much longer with our conversation. What's really interesting about that is how we can, as individuals, as humans, be so unaware of what we're creating and what we're doing, but have a whole different illusion of reality, what we think we're creating and doing.
Absolutely. Well, denial is so powerful. And that again is ego. When our ego that we all have, and we will all have egos from the day we're born to the day we die. And so I'm not saying that we shouldn't have egos, but ego wants to serve self, me, I. And that is a lot of times fulfilling whatever serves the I: food, alcohol, adoration, praise, sex, credibility, money, material wealth. That is what the ego strives for. So when you're giving that to the ego, you can never get enough of that. And that is trying to get past that is the hole in the soul. So beyond the ego, who's the one that's being this magnet that's pulling all this sometimes dysfunctional, and the ego can also pull in good things. So there is a balance of it. But for me, my ego was out of control, and it was pulling in a magnetic field of a lot of negative things that were no longer serving me and were damaging others. But I was in such denial about it, because I'm like, if I have a title, if I have a job, if I'm providing for my family, if other people think I'm great, what do you know that you think I'm not good enough? Look what I've done for you. And so the ego allows you to continue to do destructive behavior because you're doing more than others do for someone else, or they should be happy for what they have, for what you have provided.
You
And
know,
so the ego allows us to play that game, and it's really intensely, bizarrely interesting that it deludes us.
yeah, you it just like a light bulb went off in my mind, and it just reminded me of back in the day when I was in a similar situation as what you explained, not quite as intense. But just telling, saying to my wife, like, look at what you have. Look at what, look at you're able to stay at home. You're able to do what you want. You're able to buy pretty much what you would like. Like, what do you have to complain about? And that's my, ego come, no matter what, that was my defense on what, if she ever, attacked me for being mean or being, not listening or whatever, would be boom, coming out like that. And just being so unaware of what I was saying is just, and it goes along with exactly what you're saying, that whole defense
Yeah. Well,
mechanism.
once our mind is made up on something, and it was really fascinating to watch this during the election period this year. I mean, regardless of what side people were on, of what they were going to vote or who they were going to vote for, it applies to both sides. But the ego, once the ego makes a decision about a person or a policy or a political group, the mind does everything like a radar. It's like a radar or a GPS that it goes out to find information that proves that they are right. So whatever your mind is made up on, a fact or a situation, the mind or the ego finds information and deletes other information, because the ego and the mind, once it's made up, always have to be proven right. And it does things at all costs to defend it being diminished. So the power of breaking through diminishing the ego is a very hard wall to break down. And that's why addiction, and that's why self-destructive behavior, and that's why power, and that's why racism, and that's why many things happen, because we justify the ability that we are better than others because our ego tells us we are.
And that whole validation thing is exactly, what that reminds me of, Steve, is that like little exercise where you close your eyes, you open them, you look for everything red in the room, and then you close your eyes and someone says, okay, now what was blue? And you
Right.
can't, I think that's how it goes, right? And you're like,
Right,
I don't
right.
remember because I was looking for everything red. And
That's
that's what
correct.
is that pretty much what you're talking about?
Exactly.
That whole,
Exactly right.
so
Exactly right.
what is the power of like breath, prayer, meditation? Because this is, as a mindful impact podcast, one of my goals is to get as many people meditating for freaking 10 minutes a day. That's it. Because I think it could just change how people interact with each other, kindness, love, compassion, awareness, just 10 minutes a day to start with. What is the power of, and I'm taking this right off of your site, breath, prayer, meditation, and practical ways that you can experience them in your daily life. How does that work with you? Like, what does that create? And was that part of your transition?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no question that prayer and meditation, which is my communication with source, higher power, or what I choose to call God, it's me tapping into my Wi-Fi signal. So, if you think about we're all on our devices all day long, and how many times have you not have a good Wi-Fi signal? You look down, you go, oh God, I don't have a good signal. I'm not going to get an internet access. It's like, But when you have 4 or 5 bars and you're able to communicate directly and information and flow of information as you need it, it makes you feel like you're in flow. So for me, prayer meditation is me connecting to source and me connecting to higher power. And so what I've come to know in my early days through AA and then through an outpatient alcohol program, and through my own being brought up very strict Catholic and being brought up in a religious family, I'm much more spiritual now in my life than I am religious. So I'm more of a spiritual mutt, where I'm kind of like East meets West kind of philosophy and spirituality and religion. However,
Cool.
growing up as a young kid, I was glad that I was brought up in a very strong foundation that was a lot of prayer, and it was a lot of ritual, and it was a lot of honoring God and honoring higher power. So as a young kid, I knew that there was something greater than myself, and I knew it was not myself. And over the years, and I was comfortable enough to call that source God. Some people call it nature. Some people call it Yahweh, Buddha, Krishna, just source or love or whatever. But we all know that we're looking for, as human beings, I've traveled all over the world, whether it's for business or fun, from Philippines to Europe to San Diego to Atlanta to Mexico. And every culture, people want to be happy. People want to be joyful. People want their families to be safe. People want to have passion and enjoy their life. And so this common thing that we all have is ways people are seeking that. So I have found that prayer and meditation is a way to tap into the energy of higher source, a higher power that allows you to be tuned into that more deeply, more effectively, and to be guided to the places in which will bring you that. So to me, it is tapping into source. It's just like when it rains and the water goes and nourishes all the plants, or the river flows back to the ocean. Everything goes back to source. And so for me, if I don't do prayer and meditation, I am so out of whack in my energy and my focus about what's important in my life, that I start getting way out of dysfunction. So I don't let a day go by that I don't do prayer and meditation.
What's that
And
look like
sometimes,
for you?
well, sometimes it's very, it's like this morning, it was a guided meditation with Tara Brach. Tara Brach is
Oh
a
yeah.
great, Buddhist teacher and meditation yoga teacher and writer. And she does a lot of guided meditation. Sometimes it's a morning guided meditation with stuff through Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda. Sometimes it's me in deep meditation doing my own prayer breath work. I've been trained in a lot of different meditation techniques where it's just my own silent breathing work from all the chakras from top to bottom. Sometimes it's group meditation. Sometimes it's 2 minutes. Sometimes it's 30 minutes. It just depends. But I have throughout the day pause times that I just have to stop, regroup, and make sure my Wi-Fi signal is tapped in. But I do love guided meditations on certain things because it really helps keep you on track and focus. And then my wife and I sometimes do group, couple meditation where we'll sit and we'll do a guided meditation together, or we'll, it's also with COVID, it's made it restrictive, but we go to some great temples and centers and churches around our area that have all been closed because of COVID, that have a lot of great also meditative workshops or classes, and now people are doing Zoom meditations, and I've done a few of those. So I have a whole, it's like music. Like I like everything from jazz to rap to folk to, so for me, meditation is like it's like my playbook in my iPhone. I have all types of meditations that allow me to connect to source in different ways.
Yeah, that sounds like me. I have like 7 different apps that I've downloaded and bought and tried and guided through over the past couple of years. And
Yeah, there's some great ones.
yeah, yeah. Do you have a favorite for people listening if they want to tap into
Well,
one?
there's one that I have from years and years and years ago that was originally on my iPod. That was back when
Wow.
you had an iPod, and that's how old it is. And it's called Twin Flames. And it's about a 30-minute guided meditation. And it's just a very intense 30-minute guided meditation it was a group that did spiritual music, but the name of the meditation is called Twin Flames. And it takes you through your mind, your body, your soul, your connection to source. So it's like got this whole process that it takes you through in meditation. And so that's my go-to one. I've probably listened to it thousands of times and it never gets old.
Thank you for sharing that. Steve, there's a recurring theme has happened a few times throughout this podcast here, that you talking with you specifically, and it's balance. You've said it many a times, and we've talked about you during different extremes. And just is me just kind of bringing clarity for listeners of the importance of balance in our life. And you said tapping into your Wi-Fi it's kind of like that. Is making sure you're balanced on the energy, on the soul side, on the energy side of things. When it comes to friendships, this is like a totally different question from what we're talking about here, kind of. I was curious. I wanted to ask this earlier. Do you have like a different group of friends now, closer friends than you had, 10, 15 years ago? Or is it the same?
Yeah, I definitely have. I have some friends that I've known since I was in 7th grade, that now their kids know my kids, and their kids are having. So that's how much history I have with a handful of people that I went to junior high or high school with. Uh, but most of the friends that I've had have peeled off over the years that were really business related. When I was the CEO of a company or the president of the company, it's funny how many friends you have when you have a yacht and you have a title and you have you're buying drinks and you have an expense report. It's funny how many people you have that are quote friends. And at the time they were friends and I enjoyed them,
Yeah,
but
sure.
many of them are no longer involved in my life, and we don't have much in common anymore. But I still value that path that I've had with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so my circle is much, much smaller as I'm in my mid 50s than it was when I was in my 30s or 40s. And the relationships that I have are much deeper. If I'm not in a friendship with someone that really is wanting to talk about purpose or life or God or family or spirituality or making a difference in the world, I get really bored with the conversations very quickly. So I have to have people that are on a path of self-quest, self-improvement, making a difference in the world. So I seem to be attracted to a lot of people that are thought leaders or purpose-driven leaders or spiritual activists in some fashion or another. So yeah, my circle has definitely evolved and changed. And I'm also very, very comfortable. You know, my wife kids me all the time. She goes, "You're your own best friend." And she loves that about me. And I love that about her because she's her own best friend. And I am my own best friend. Like, I really like myself. I
That's
really,
beautiful.
I like spending time with myself, and I can't always say that that was true. So I love solitude, quite frankly. I like inner relationship connection, and I do have people that I don't have to see every month or every week, and I have some mentor, and I've been blessed enough to have also a lot of mentors. I've had a business coach or a mentor that I paid for since I was 27 years old. So I'm 57 now. So for 30 years, I've paid for different business coaches and mentors at very high caliber. And some of them remain friends and mentors and associates of mine that are just like, gold to me about their wisdom, their guidance, their own path. Some of them are my age or older. Some of them are in their 70s or 80s that are just a golden treat to be around and absorb their wisdom and their past. So, it's a long answer to your question, but
No, that's
it
great.
definitely is evolving.
Are you two questions for that? Are you and I think the reason I ask these questions, Steve, is because I think a lot of people can relate to this, right? First off, real quick answer. Do you meet with these coaches or mentors once a week or once a month? What's the schedule?
It's usually, it starts out usually once a week when I have a coach mentor, and then it usually goes to twice a month. So it's usually every other week. And then there's
Okay.
text or email in between. And for 5 years, I had a doctor, a holistic doctor that was also my coach. His name is Bernard Meltzer, and he wrote the 10 Rules of High Performance Living. And I would go see him every Friday for an hour to an hour and a half. He would do acupuncture and acupressure on me, and I would sit and meditate while he was in and out of the room doing that. And then we would have a coaching counseling session while he was doing acupressure on me. And he, over the year, and as soon as I started seeing him, he challenged me to do a vegan diet and to do a vegan plant-based diet, which I never had any desire to even consider. But I was trying to be on my best level. This is back when I started my consulting company. And I said, well, I'm going to make myself my first client. And as my first client for myself, if I was advising myself that you wanted to start a whole new career, go out on a path you'd never done, you want to help inspire and guide and help be of service to others, what should you do? And I said, well, I better make sure my body, mind, and spirit and soul and business acumen are in the highest level possible. So I went to go see this doctor who's he's in his 70s. He was originally a surgeon in his 30s, very successful, high paid, powered surgeon in ego drive himself. Got tired of cutting people open after the fact and eventually went and became a holistic practitioner. So he is a medical doctor, but he got very into nutrition and health and meditation. And so I went to him 5 years every Friday for an hour and a half and had his wisdom and guidance. And so that was a very intense process. And I talked to him again last week. And during COVID, that kind of got slowed down. But I mean, that's sometimes that's the intensity of the relationship I have on coaches or guides.
I don't know if this is exactly it, but it sounds, and I've heard it so many times, it sounds there's so many individuals that make a whole bunch of money and then realize it's not all cut out to be what they thought it was, and then they go to some holistic or spiritual aspect of life. I see that theme a lot. I never see like a spiritual person go and make millions of dollars. They don't. There's never that reverse usually,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, there's definitely, I've had highs and lows in my life of success and financial success. And there was a point that I was like, had to get to that certain number and that certain decimal had to be at a certain point before I felt I had worth.
Yeah.
And then the crash of the 2008 market, that definitely dropped my wealth and my debt in different, I mean, that blew everybody out of the water. So you have to rebuild. But my quest to be as wealthy and successful as I wanted in my 30s and 40s is very, very, very different than I am now in this path. It's not about making money. It's not about, although I coach and consult people that obviously want to make money, and money makes the world go down. I mean, go around.
Yeah.
And as people have talked about, money is currency. That's why they call it currency. And you need currency to turn lights on in a room to have energy. So I clearly understand the power of money. However, the excessive power that we put on money, and we make that our higher power, we make that our God, that's where the problem is, that the balance then gets out of whack. You can look at people that I have also seen many people of wealth, way beyond the wealth that I've ever created. And I've met a lot of wealthy people. And there is this quest and drive that they have. And many of them without question have said they thought it was going to feel different. They thought when they made their first million, when they made their first 5 million, when they made their first 50 million, when they first sold their company, when they first became the CEO, whatever it was, they thought it was going to feel different, feel better, feel deeper, and last longer. And it was fleeting, because if it's not connected to a spiritual connection that's filling that hole in the soul, and it really is for higher purpose and higher meaning, it becomes what's the next thing. And so there's always this chasing thing. So that I have found also people of high success, they get to the point, they go, okay, now that I've made all this money and I'm not as fulfilled as I thought I was, or I want to be of service, that's when servant leadership usually starts happening for many people. They start being involved in charitable foundations. They start giving back. They start creating their own foundations, because they realize that quest was cool and fun and they achieved it, but now what? And so it usually leads to something of being of service or being of value or contributing.
That's cool.
So why not do that in your 20s or 30s versus waiting till you're 50? You know, I'm saying that's my message to people is,
that's my next question. I was going to ask that.
Why? So my thing is, even though I had coaches and mentors, I always in the early days hired coaches and mentors that helped me make more money. How can I get more sales? How can I get better leads? How can I, and it wasn't until I was probably in my, I'm actually diminishing myself. I mean, I've actually been on a spiritual quest. I mean, I read Think and Grow Rich and Paramahansa Yogananda Autobiography of Yogi, when I was in my late teens, but I always tucked it away. Like I always was like this closeted spiritual guy that didn't feel comfortable bringing it out in the mainstream because I didn't want to be judged. And so now I literally am bold enough to put on my website and my business, I don't really use business cards, but on my business cards, spiritual business activist. That's what I am. I'm mostly a spiritual being, committed to being more spiritual. I'm very good at business. I understand business acumen, and I'm actively out trying to motivate and inspire young entrepreneurs and young people, men and women, and seniors who are involved in business to be more focused on their passion, their purpose, and their spiritual connection in the world. And how can you do that through your business and still make money at what you're making money at, but feel more driven purposefully right now, today, this week, not next year, and not when you make your first million, doing it now. I'm also involved in a group called Junior Achievement, which is a youth organization that's 100 years old that helps 10 million kids globally around the world become more self-actualized, financial literacy, self-esteem. And I'm involved as a chancellor and a volunteer in that organization, helping, and they focus with 13 and 19-year-olds in school systems and throughout the world, having this consciousness about making a contribution beyond just making money.
Nice. That's awesome. So do you have like your own definition of success, or what would success mean to you then if you were somebody just randomly asked you?
Yeah, my definition of success now is that I am daily connected to my higher source, and I'm being led by something besides myself, and that I'm successfully in connection and communication with source every day. That's my definition of me being successful.
Cool. And you mentioned earlier you love, you're your own best friend. Do you think that has to do a lot because you just have like an authenticity about yourself now? Like you're just so true to yourself, vulnerable. Do you think that's a big factor?
Well, it was funny when it's a kind of an oxymoron to say I'm my own best friend when I'm out talking about ego or Iggy. Because that sounds very egotistical. But what it boils down to, it's like when you're on a plane and they say, put the air mask on yourself before you try and help somebody else. And so I had to find a way, with all my inadequacies, all my failures, all my ineffectiveness as a human being, as a husband, as a wife, as a business leader, all the inadequacies that I know intimately that I have that others may not. I have to find a way to love those as much as I love the obvious things that are, quote, on a website that say how cool I am. And that's why I wanted to make sure on my website that I put, my vulnerabilities and my downfalls as much as my successes, because it's a mixed bag and I'm all of those things. So when I say I'm my own best friend, it means I can still love myself and connect with myself in spite of all those things, but because of those things. And with that, then that allows me to then have this higher connection that is my constant quest to get better and more connected with that, and thus share that then with others. So if I wasn't my own best friend, it would be hard for me to help other people find their own purpose and their own best friend relationship with themselves, because that then allows me to be worthy to then have any conversation with God or source that I want any day of the week, because I know that I'm connected and I'm a part of source. So I'm never in shame or doubt or fear or anxiety about not having this communication, about being, if not with everyone else in the world, which I try and be as authentic and transparent as I can, with my source, and I say this all the time to people. My wife and I have been married 30 years. My wife is my soulmate. I love her to death. But my relationship with my higher power and my connection is even more intimate and more important and more diligent than that. And everything else has to come secondary to that. Because that relationship has been with me from birth. It'll be with me to death. And I also believe in past lives. So it'll be in future and past lives as well. So that relationship to source is connection, that it is my most important successful relationship that I've had most consistently in my entire life.
You're
And that's
walking your
how,
talk. I
so
love it.
that's how I look at that success factor.
Yeah. Cool. I know that we wouldn't change anything. I want to honor your time here, and it's almost been it's been an hour pretty much. So I'll ask you one last question here, Steve. Uh, and I ask everybody this. I know that you wouldn't change anything because it brought you to who you are today. But if you could go back and say anything or tell your 18-year-old self something, what would you say to him?
I would say find ways to not damage the ones you say you love the most sooner than later.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'll press stop.